When I was 20 years old, I was studying law and living in a tiny studio that I shared with a roommate. I slept on the mattress on the floor. One night, in the midst of studying for my exams and surrounded by stacks of law books, I picked up a pencil and started drawing a portrait of John Lennon. I don't remember exactly why I chose him. Maybe because I grew up listening to the Beatles with my dad, or maybe because his image always represented creativity and freedom to me. I'm not sure. I finished the drawing and left it on the table. My roommate walked by, looked at it, and said, "I didn't know you could draw." And without thinking, I answered, "I forgot that I could." At the time, I didn't realize how true that sentence was. As a kid, I always used to draw, all the time. My dad loved drawing portraits, and he would show me how to measure a face on an image with my thumb, and how to see shadows instead of just lines. I would buy teenage magazines and spend hours drawing Leonardo DiCaprio's face, my biggest crush at the time. Drawing was the first activity where I experienced what psychologists call flow. Hours would pass and I wouldn't notice. But somewhere around 14 or 15, that part of my life disappeared. I started focusing on other things with friends and drawing slowly faded away. No one ever suggested that art could actually be more than a hobby to me. So when I got a scholarship to study law, it felt like the responsible path. My family struggled financially and law promised stability. The problem was that I absolutely hated it. I remember telling a friend of mine that I had gotten the scholarship. She looked at me and said, "Law? I never thought of you as a lawyer." At the time, I thought that she was being rude. Now I realize she just saw something that I couldn't see yet. I was building a life that did not match who I was. That night, when I drew John Lennon, I realized something. It felt like I was reconnecting with a person I used to know but had lost along the way. I realized I had been living in contradiction with myself. But leaving that path, the path of security, was not easy. It meant disappointing my family. It meant walking away from the financial stability they had worked so hard to give me. And I was scared. So one day, I was walking through downtown in my small town when I saw a poster on a wall. It was an advertising of a cultural exchange program to the United States. You could live with a host family and study English for a year. I remember standing there, reading that poster and feeling something inside of me pulling me towards that opportunity. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how real it felt. I could almost feel myself already there. Of course, it also meant moving to another country for at least a year without speaking much English and without knowing if anything would work out. A single poster on a wall made me imagine a completely different life. And once that possibility appeared, it was impossible to unsee it. Years later, I was living in San Francisco and sharing my artwork on Instagram when a company that hosted paint and sip events reached out to me. They asked if I would be interested in teaching art at their events. Even though I felt completely unprepared, I said yes. And that opportunity opened doors I didn't even know existed. It led to many new opportunities, including starting my own company, bringing art and creativity experiences to teams inside organizations in Silicon Valley. Fast forward to years later, when I started hosting creative retreats, I began speaking with hundreds of women who were interested in coming. Many of them were in midlife. Their lives were changing in big ways. Some had gone through a divorce, some had lost their partners, some had children living home. And almost all of them said the same thing: "I feel lost." But as I kept having these conversations, I started noticing something interesting. They weren't actually lost. Most of them knew exactly what they cared about, what they value, and what they wanted more of in life. The real problem was something else. Their lives had been built for a version of themselves that no longer existed. Their environment had not caught up with who they were becoming. I saw this clearly during one of our retreats in Bali. We were doing a poetry workshop with a Balinese poet. There were 8 women sitting in a circle. The exercise invited them to write about what they saw in a collage they had created the day before. When they started reading their poems out loud, you could feel the energy in the room change. There was vulnerability. There was courage. Women were sharing things they had not said out loud before. And there was something else. Women who had just met just a few days before were suddenly holding space for each other in a way that felt very real. In that moment, it became very clear to me what was happening. The retreat environment had created the conditions for inner parts of them to emerge. And it made me realize something about my own story too. Sometimes we think we have lost ourselves, but maybe we haven't. Maybe we have simply been living in environments that no longer nurture who we are. When that happens, people often try to solve the problem by thinking harder. They analyze themselves, they search for answers, they try to figure themselves out. But in my experience, clarity often appears when we change the conditions around us. New environments interrupt old patterns. When you step outside your normal environment, something interesting happens. The routines that shaped who you are every day loosen their grip. The roles you have been playing for years start to soften. Suddenly, you can see your life with a little more distance. You can see what still fits and what doesn't. Now, of course, someone might ask, what happens when you go back home? Won't you just return to the same environment you had before? Yes, but you won't return as the same person. Because the purpose of stepping into a new environment is not to escape your life. It's to give you a chance to experience parts of yourself that had been forgotten. And once you experience those parts again, it becomes very difficult to pretend they don't exist. You come back with information. You start noticing what still belongs in your life and what needs to change. And those changes don't have to be necessarily big. In fact, most of them are surprisingly small. You adjust your routines, you explore new interests, you spend time with different people. You begin shaping your environment so it reflects the person you are becoming. And there's a simple way to start doing that. I like to think of it as a small reminder called ACT, A-C-T. A is for alter your environment. Go somewhere new, even temporarily. New places interrupt old patterns. C is for change what you consume. Expose yourself to art, ideas, conversation, experiences that awaken your curiosity again. And T is for try something you once loved. Return to something that used to bring you joy before life got too busy. Visit a museum you have always wanted to see. Take a dance class. Go somewhere unfamiliar. Pick up a hobby you loved years ago. Do something that fills your heart instead of just satisfying your head. When life feels misaligned, it doesn't mean something is wrong with you necessarily. It may simply mean that the version of you that built your life is no longer the version of you who lives in it. And sometimes the fastest way to rediscover yourself is not by looking inward. Sometimes it is by stepping into environments that allow the next version of you to emerge. I often think back to that moment in the apartment when my roommate looked at my drawing and said, "I didn't know you could draw." And I answered, "I forgot that I could." Maybe you haven't lost yourself either. Maybe there are parts of you simply waiting for the chance to come back to life.